Okay, we are going to be on page 92 in our notes, and we are beginning the next church age. We did the study of church history. Is your pointer up? Study of church history already, preparation for the ministry, and those were all introductory, of course. We've looked and have finished the age of Ephesus, the Ephesian age, and I always am mindful that that's not a typical phrase that is used out in churches, except those who might recognize that the seven churches of Asia in the Revelation are prophetic in nature, and the only thing that they would be prophetic of is the church ages as we went through them. Now, when John was writing this, the believers probably didn't have an idea or understanding exactly how far that went or how developed that would be, because they had no clue there's going to be another 2,000 years. They were expecting Christ really in their day, which is an important doctrine all by itself. The idea that Christ's return could happen at any time means that it's going to happen before the tribulation. Okay, not knowing, because if the tribulation starts, then people say, aha, now I know when Jesus is going to return 7 years from now. And so the believers missing the tribulation because of the rapture is implicit, it is implied in their understanding by the imminent return of Christ. So that was the Ephesian age, but nonetheless, they had enough things to crop up right away, which is not a testimony of the weakness of churches or the weakness of Christianity. It's a testimony to how weird and how bizarre people can be and how they can read things into stuff willy-nilly. There's nothing stopping them. And so you want to remember that what we've been looking at so far, we've been delving into very extensively what are a set of basic doctrines, a bunch of basic theological issues, not everything that could be considered, but the things that are going to be cropping up over the years. So we'll be referring back to that basic doctrine set from the Ephesian age. And so we'll see that at just about at any time, we'll say, okay, this is what they're doing during the Reformation age. This is what they're doing during the medieval church age, and see how this compares to all the things that we've looked at so far. So things are actually going to speed up in a certain way because we'll only really be looking at things that were an issue during their time period. So in one way, it will speed up a little bit. It's also, as we go to look at these next church ages and the theological issues, what you should expect to get exposed to are doctrinal problems, theological problems that we really don't encounter in our church. See, because we teach the truth. Okay. Well, we're adhering to one set of things. We're not covering every ism that's out there. On Sunday morning, we don't cover everything. Try to bring in a few things to expand our understanding of the world of Christianity. But there's a lot of things that we don't really encounter ourselves personally. But if you want to know church history, and if you want to understand the world of churchianity, then this is the reason why we have this class. Is to expand our understanding of what's going on out in all the world of churches. The immediate benefit of that should be that when somebody says, why don't we all get together? You'll say, yeah, no, you don't want to do that. And you'll know why. You know why we don't want to all get together. I was watching one speaker recently, and he was talking about one particular area of theology, a problem area today. And he pointed out how there's within that one theological area, there were many variations. And so you couldn't say, well, this ism, okay? Because those who were adherents to that particular theological stand, they varied within themselves. So as you get a grip on things, you start to realize, well, what else is out there? And so this is advanced material. So don't be surprised by that. But you want to be able to, again, see more and have a greater knowledge. So you'll be good students, good Bible students. Okay, so we are looking at then today the Smyrna age, the suffering church. And my mouse won't. There it goes. Okay. The suffering church. And for that, we're looking at Revelation chapter 2, verses 8 to 11. It says, "And unto the angel of the church in Smyrna write, These things saith the first and the last, which was dead and is alive. I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and you shall have tribulation 10 days. 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. He that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death." Well, Jesus commended the church for its spiritual richness in spite of its worldly poverty and persecution. It was going to experience persecution, which led the church in one of its first struggles to resist the centralizing pressure to conform, whether it was going to be to paganism or to a universal church. So those are two significant things about the persecution. It wasn't just that they were getting persecuted for the faith, but it was pressure to either cave into paganism and or to try to establish a universal church. You want to remember that this universal church idea, a universal religion, was something that was present from the beginning of time. Satan especially was trying to act that way when it came to the time of the flood, the Tower of Babel, and especially the Tower of Babel, with the effort to organize the world to unite around the tower. And what did God do? He confounded their languages and made them separate. It would almost seem like, well, shouldn't we want to have a universal faith and have everything under the dominion of Jesus Christ? Well, yes, and we call that the millennium. In the meantime, what we push for is individual responsibility. Individual responsibility. Whenever you get to where you have a universal standard, you got to ask who's in charge. And as long as men are in charge, that standard is not standard. It'll come and go and redefine itself as needed to be able to cater to the whims of man and cater to the appetites of man and whatever's convenient. Now, we want to have individual responsibility. So that pressure to conform to a universal thing, to have the pressure to develop a headship over other churches, it's going to start to appear in this church age. It won't really come about until, most specifically, until the end of the age as you go into the next age. From 100 to 300 AD, it's after the completion of the scriptures with the book of the Revelation and the death of John. So you have the death of John in 100 AD. After going through its days of persecution, the next age, you can see it there on the screen, the age of Pergamus, which is going to begin around 313 AD. More specifically, it's going to go with the Council of Nicaea. It'll be marked by the proclamation of religious tolerance in Emperor Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 AD, and the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Now, of the things that you want to, say, yes, this is new, I've never heard this before, or not realized it, or you sort of heard about it, today you want to be able to have these as anchor points. You want to recognize, if you want to say, what are the major things to keep in mind? This is a major thing. Okay, this is major. The Edict of Milan and the Council of Nicaea. In the Edict of Milan is when the pressure is going to be put up. In the Edict of Milan and the Council of Nicaea is when the is when they are going to finally get that universal church in place. That's when it's going to happen. The Council of Nicaea, and we're not going to be looking at it in this church age, but just as a thing to help you understand how it's marked here. The Council of Nicaea, well, the Edict of Milan, Constantine is going to say, okay, Christianity is finally is going to be tolerated. It's not going to be persecuted anymore. Then, in order to get some disputes settled, he calls the Council of Nicaea, and this is where things really get to be defined as to who's in charge. It's going to be a little bit later when Christianity will be named the official state religion. It's not actually named as the official state religion at this time in the Council of Nicaea. Okay, so and you'll see regularly references to the Nicene age, the ante-Nicene fathers, the Nicene fathers, and the post-Nicene fathers. And they drop the A when they say that instead of Nicaea, that's like Nicene. You've heard of the Nicene Creed? How many people have heard of the Nicene Creed? Okay, and it's related to that. Okay, so the Smyrna church age coincides roughly what is known as the ante-Nicene age. Okay, which is also called the patristic age. We say patristic because they had the church fathers that were occurring in this time period. So it's the patristic age of the ante-Nicene church fathers. And then the next age, the Pergamus age, will include the Nicene and post-Nicene church fathers. So this is all called, see it right here, this all is called the patristic age. So ante-Nicene is those church fathers that were teaching and preaching before the Council of Nicaea. The Nicene fathers were those who were part of that Nicene Council, and then later on the post-Nicene fathers. Okay, I'm at paragraph 203 on page 92. Now, according to church historians, the entire patristic age ended with a critical change at the fall of the Roman Empire in 476. That's when the medieval church age is going to start. That's according to church historians, regular church historians. However, if you do further reading, the patristic age is sometimes, so if you get into other reading, you'll recognize they'll recognize it as ending in the West by 600 AD, and then in the East by 750 AD, and then sometimes, by the time of Charlemagne in 800 AD. So they got a little bit of variation that they have in there, but this is typically understood as the patristic age, as I have it on the screen there. However, for our study, we divide the patristic age into two parts that correspond to the Revelation churches of Sardis and Pergamus. The church of, I have a misprint in the book there. Smyrna. Okay, the church of Smyrna, and then the church of Pergamus. And that's how we divide the patristic age. So that's the date of the age of the church of Smyrna. Key event, one of the key ideas is that Nicene Council. That's where the critical break occurs to our understanding. Okay, so now we're going to look at the character of the age. There you go, character of the age. The first thing to look at is that they were looking for purity, purity during this time period with pressures from without and from within. Paragraph 205 says the letter to the church in Smyrna is the shortest of all the letters to the seven churches. It's the shortest of them. Perhaps the reason for this is that this is the one church which receives no rebuke, only encouragement to endure through intense persecution. So Smyrna could rightly be called the persecuted church or the martyred church. Smyrna was the opposite of the Laodicean church. Smyrna suffered, but it was rich. Laodicea was fat and comfortable, but it was in poverty. Being the martyr church is probably the reason for its spiritual richness. The reason they are counted so blessed and without judgment is commonly understood because of the effect of going through suffering for the sake of Christ. People, when they're going through suffering, will, for their faith, will tend to say, hey, if I'm going to have to go through suffering for this, then I better make sure that I, have a stand worth suffering for. People who don't end up suffering for the faith, they don't have a reason to examine their faith. Now, very interestingly, this is one of the key things why Baptists have grown and why Baptists and Baptist-type churches will grow. We've noticed here in Bayonne that we've had a number of the Catholic churches shut down and they're being replaced by high-rise apartments, aren't they? And the schools have shut down, and I think Nancy was saying there's one grammar school that's left. And I was talking to somebody not too long ago. Catholic grammar school. One Catholic grammar school left. And I was talking to somebody just last week on the street, and we were talking about differences of things. And I explained that one of the problems with Catholicism is that they depend on parents baptizing their babies and then bringing them up Catholic. And as you have families that are not caring about religion so much, dropping out, they're not bringing their babies to get baptized and then catechized. And so the Catholic Church is shrinking. They do not have an outreach where they are going out to try to win people to Christ. Okay, that's not their method of growth. And so they are necessarily going to die off and shrink. Baptist churches and churches like Baptist, evangelistic churches, will always be challenging people about their faith. When somebody comes into church here, a new face like we had this morning, right? Okay, you can be sure. Number one, I'm always going to try to have the gospel in anyhow in every message, at any time. Even if I have all saved people, they need to hear the gospel presentation so you can copy it and use it on somebody else. Okay, but when somebody comes in, there have been times when where you can tell that visitors come in that I haven't known, and you can tell the tenor of the sermon changes completely. Okay, about the time you hear me refer to Romans chapter 3, things are changing. Must be a lost person here somewhere. And so nobody comes in with the assumption that they're saved. Even if you see them come in with a Bible, they open it up and read with everybody, and they open up the hymnals and they can sing the hymns. We still don't assume that they're Christian until we hear their testimony that they're definitely born again. Because there have been plenty of those also who come from a background where they don't have a good gospel, they don't have a clear gospel, and they need to hear the gospel and how Christ can save them forever. So there's always that challenge. So we actually have a mini persecution that's going on. In other words, there's a challenge to somebody's faith in order to come in and be part of the church here. Okay, so the Smyrna church, that's all they had was persecution. So they were going to have to try to respond to that and make sure if they're going to suffer, their faith was going to end up getting purified. Even in the times where somebody is willing to look at their Christianity and questioning it and wanting to know things, they are going to go through a challenge to say, well, what have I been taught? And that's talking about somebody who's willing. Okay, so let me see. So you'll see a greater purity of faith because of that. The Laodicean church being comfortable, the Bible says, hardly shall a rich man enter into heaven. Why? Because they trust in their riches. They trust in their riches. And so that's why the Laodicean church, being very rich and powerful, is also the deadest of the churches. So they're going to go through 10 days of tribulation. This has been regarded as 10 Roman persecutions in this time period. Now, those 10 persecutions are listed in the book starting on page 93. We're not going to go through all of the 10 persecutions. It would be good to read through on your own to see what it was like. Paragraph 206, persecution and suffering have always had the effect of purifying the church and believers because they call us to examine to what degree we're committed to our faith. It's possible to be greatly committed while things are going good, but due to how hard it is to keep that level of commitment, when we are tried, reveals those who are weak. The weak will either drop off or do the opposite, toughen up. Okay, one of the two will happen. We want to pray that they would toughen up instead. Say when I heard the saying the first time, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. First time I heard that, I thought that meant that the tough will scram and get out of there. They'll get going with serving instead. Although we might not have great persecution all the time, offering baptism only to qualified candidates has served to call for self-examination before being committed to the membership of Baptist churches. This is in contrast to the pedo-Baptists. Okay, what is a pedo-Baptist? What is the pedo referring to? Brother Joe, you don't count because you know for sure. Somebody else. Child, yes. Okay, you got your pediatrician. I remember confusing pedo with with PED with POD, and I said, to my mom one time, I got to go see a podiatrist. Okay, no, it's a pediatrician you want. Okay, those who baptize infants, who presume that faith will follow in the future, which was one of the issues that arose because of the persecution. Okay, so that is going to be an issue that's going to come up. What about our kids? Maybe we should get them baptized. As persecution has been a great purifier of Christianity, that pressure will cause two divergent movements to coalesce, a united church and separatist churches. That's what's going to happen. They will either be driven to respond to the persecution by uniting, or they will be driven to separate from the compromised united church. The united church will end up compromising in order to try to have everybody get along together, in order to establish some official doctrine or official practice. They'll end up compromising on the side issues. The separatists, they will be driven away. So this pressure that they're going to go into, this persecution, will go paradoxically into two separate directions. We want to be with the separatists. This church age will have its detractors and adversaries to contend with, as indicated by the synagogue of Satan. The church will not only face pressure from persecution from the outside in that sense, but also from the pressure that comes from the intellectual influence of the worldly philosophy of the day and the heretical movements that evolved from that. So they're going to have pressure from the outside to conform or separate. They're going to have pressure on the inside as the worldly philosophies start to take root in them. Okay, so 10 persecutions. This part coming from Newman, a manual church history we have right there. It's also available as a free download. You can get it and read it on your computer at the church website. Christianity was a religio illicita, an illegal religion. It was the policy of the Roman Empire to tolerate the religions of conquered peoples so long as they would not attempt to proselytize. Judaism was a religio licita. So Judaism was a legal religion as long as it wasn't trying to proselytize. Christianity so far as it was distinguished from Judaism, was reckoned among secret societies or collegia. Where do you get the, where have you heard the word collegia in the Catholic Church? The College of Cardinals? Ah, okay. So, secret societies or collegia which were contrary to law. Cicero, back before Christ, says, separately let no one have gods, nor may they worship privately new or foreign gods, unless they have been publicly recognized. Or isn't that what America has been about? You don't have a legal recognition by the government to approve of you as a church, that you are an existing church. England has that. We do not have that. That was something we kept free of. Now, some people will ask me, well, are you a 501c3 organization? What does 501c3 organization mean?
It's like a charity organization.
Charity organization is tax exempt, okay? However, a 501c3 letter, when you get that, we have one of those for the church. What that does is that it says that the IRS recognizes what you're claiming to be, so that if anybody gives an offering, they can use it as a deduction on their income taxes. Now, do you have to have a 501c3 letter to do that? Actually, no. Okay. A church can operate without having told the IRS anything. Somebody can say to the IRS, oh, I gave so much money to church, I tithe faithfully 10%, amen, of my gross income to God's work, to support God's work. And so government, I'm claiming that on my on my taxes, on my 1040 as a tax exemption. And the IRS will recognize that. Now, if the IRS thinks that you're up to something and they want to audit you, they could say, well, can you give proof of your giving? And they say yes. And so we're required to keep people's offering envelopes for 7 years. So we have, filed away in boxes every year. We get rid of the 8 years back offering envelopes. So we keep all that information. And some people have had to have a letter to send to the IRS sometimes. It's actually happened on a few occasions. And so the IRS, if they really suspected something, they would then come to us and say, can you demonstrate to us, can you give us some evidence that you're a church? The 501c3 letter, what that does is it's a communication that we had with the IRS in advance of anything like that. So the IRS says, yeah, we don't have to do any homework later on. You got this letter. We recognize that you're a church. They do not establish us as a church. And so there are those who would like to have it be that any religious organization's got to get approved by the government. And that's what the whole First Amendment is about, is that you can't have the government establishing a religion. Okay, so the Roman government was saying should have a public recognition for a church. Gaius, who was writing from 110 to 180 AD, said, speaking of forbidden associations, neither a society nor college nor body of this kind is conceded to all promiscuously. In other words, we just don't do it willy-nilly, recognizing them. For this thing is coerced or regulated by laws or codes of the Senate and imperial or princely constitutions. The essentially proselyting spirit of Christianity was an additional cause of its unlawfulness. Now, the Roman government is going to make the move to have a law to establish the church when you get to Emperor Constantine and the Nicene Council. At about that time, they are going to say it's got its approval. And that's when churches really get into a time of persecution. The separatists get into its great time of persecution on account of, it's like the church didn't join Rome, but Rome joined the church. And now they're going to use the Roman system, which will turn anybody who's not part of the Christian church, they will become a religio illicita. He continues, he says, Christianity was a religion which aspired to universality. Christ's kingdom was to be set up throughout the whole earth. With the Romans, the state was the chief thing. Religion was to be promoted only insofar as it served the interests of the state. The Christians had no sympathy with this idea and their enemies lost no opportunity to represent Christianity as dangerous to the state. This brought upon them the enmity of rulers. This is why later on, when you had Baptists and they didn't recognize the state religion and its state baptism, you were not just considered only a heretical group, you were considered a treasonous group against the state. And so you got persecuted from the official church, and you got persecuted by the government as well. Usually they were both the same. Christianity was a religion hated by the influential classes. The withdrawal of Christians from social intercourse with the pagans, rendered necessary by the idolatrous practices connected with every department of life, caused the Christians to be looked upon as enemies of the human race also. Their refusal to participate in idolatrous rites and to frequent the temples, and the exclusion of their homes and of necessity their persons of all symbols of idolatry, led them to be looked upon as atheists or enemies of the gods. So the original atheists were Christians. They were atheists according to the Roman standard. So David Cloud, in his book, lists the 10 persecutions, and those are listed in the book there. Now, if you go to page 95, look at paragraph number 209. We should be careful to note that the persecution of the church was not constant or necessarily universal. In other words, of these 10 persecutions, some might have been empire-wide. Some could have been local only, but there were 10 of them. It wasn't in a constant state of persecution. The persecutions would come and go. Also, not all believers resisted the persecution, while there were also those who invited it for the glory of martyrdom. Those who invited it had to understand that it was prideful to seek martyrdom as some kind of badge to brag about. During this time frame, there was a constant effort to get Christianity to either yield to paganism or, in other words, to be canceled out, or to be blended with paganism. So there's that universalizing effect. This is how a lot of pagan things are going to be introduced into the Catholic Church later on. When they finally get to where the church and state are united, okay, it was no longer pressure from without to adopt pagan views. It's going to become pressure from within to adopt pagan views. Okay, let's look at page 96. Let's look at the apologists. This is part of the character of the age. Because of the persecutions, Christian leaders had reason to offer explanations of Christianity as a defense. Overall, the early Christian apologists had diverse audiences in mind and sought to engage with a wide range of people, including Roman authorities, philosophers, pagans, Jews, heretics, seekers, and fellow believers. And so I'm not going to go through any of the apologists or the kind of things they stood for. That you can read on your own also. But what I'll point out is what we mean by apologist is not people who are saying, "I'm sorry, I'm a Christian." No, an apologist is one who's giving a defense of Christianity. Now, you have apologists, and there are also such thing as polemicists. Polemics has to do with war, and that means you're on the attack. And so you'll see polemicists as they go to criticize different things. But the apologists, what they were doing is essentially was responding to those Roman leaders and other pagan religious leaders who were making accusations against them. And they were saying, no, 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 you got us all wrong. They were trying to help them see, no, we're not treasonous. No, we're cool. Everything's okay here. No problems. We're just doing our own thing on the side here. And all those things that you're accusing us of eating babies and drinking blood, which is one of the things they were accused of, and having orgies, all that stuff. No, here's what we do. Now, in the course of those apologists writing, you are now going to see logical explanations that they are putting forth so that people could understand what Christianity was about. And so now logic is going to be being introduced, which is a good thing. And we get a whole wealth of information about what they believed because of that. As they were giving a defense and those defenses were recorded, now we get the benefit today of looking back on that and saying, oh, okay, so this is what was characteristic of that time period, and here's what they believed. So they gave us definitions of that. And so you can see the different groups. They might have written to Jews. They might with a Jewish audience trying to help them understand what they were doing. Might have written to Roman authorities. They might have written to pagan authorities. And they were also writing to explain how they weren't Gnostics or how they weren't something else. And that would be the benefit of the apologists. Okay, we are going to stop with that. Okay, that's quite a load to get on us. Okay, so the key takeaways from this are, it's a time of persecution and purification. We want to remember, here is where the pressure is really going to start. That's going to create all those church divisions that are going to come later on. Catholic Church, Protestant churches, it all starts here in this time period. And the thing that is a key factor is this idea of uniting. That idea of uniting is going to start here, and it's going to present problems from here on out. Somebody have a question or a comment? Okay. Okay, very good. We will look at the cults the next time. Before we get into the actual theological issues of the day. Okay, so I do encourage you to read over those things and read through these things and to get a little bit better grip of the history of those things.